Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm from Laying Groundwork here in Missoula, Montana, and I am here with my colleague Kirk Norby, and Kirk is our instructor for Shigong. And, you know, I have, practiced various forms of Qigong and Tai Chi over the years, and it's one of those practices that I have found um, so nourishing, really, and so healthy. And so, what the purpose of this little video here is to give people who are interested in practicing Qigong a little bit of background in terms of what Qigong is about, what the basic philosophies and the reasons for the practice, basically. Kind of following through the Chinese concept of this movement practice that comes with. It's kind of the sister science to Chinese medicine, if you can kind of think about it like that. So one of the things that I always like to start, and I guess honestly, I've never even thought about asking anybody, what does Qigong actually mean, Kirk? I've never asked that question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
There's two syllables, Qi and Gong. Qi loosely translates to energy,
right,
and Gong translates to dedicated practice.
Okay.
So we have a dedicated energy practice.
Excellent. Yeah. I think that's really well put. Really well put, because that kind of gives you the idea. Because this is Qigong. I think people think about it as being movement, but it's actually a bigger thing than that, isn't it?
It's a big field.
Yeah, it's a big field. Yeah.
When we talk about movement, we think about movement, but we also move a lot internally. It's not always external. So Qigong meditation or just Qigong, and it's all inside.
It's all inside, yeah. So it's a really. I think the thing I've always enjoyed about the experience of it is it feels very holistic to me.
It is, yeah, yes.
Exactly. But there is a lot of concept that I think if we have a little bit of background in understanding Chinese medicine theory and the role that Qigong plays in that larger medical system, basically, because it is considered to be an alternative medical system, that I think that the movements and the meditations and the suggestions in the case of the series that you're teaching, which is Qigong for it's for seasons. It tracks the way that we change throughout the seasons and their needs, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's also I think it is really interesting for us to understand, what are these terms that we have maybe heard a million times, like yin yang, right?
Yes.
And understanding. I mean, I've heard 5 elements or 5 phases. So could you explain a little bit about how those kind of overarching concepts and philosophies, how does that all come together for a Qigong practice?
Good questions. Yin and Yang are terms we've probably heard a lot, but if you haven't heard of them, you've probably seen the symbol, which is basically a round shape with 2 big commas inside. One's black and one's white, and then in each of those there's a spot of the other color. So the Yin and Yang it's a way of looking at contrasts.
Okay.
So you have light and dark, female, male, winter, summer, stillness, activity, or motion. That is the basics of that. It's a great question because it goes into the next part. Right,
exactly. So that takes us to 5 phases, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so say more about that.
The 5-phase paradigm is our way of looking at the movement or the changes in the seasons.
Okay.
Particularly in nature, and since we're part of nature, it is happening in us as well.
Right.
So we talk about 5 of them, and the seasons generally, traditionally, are considered to change about the midpoint between the solstice and the equinox.
Okay.
But that, where that's maybe the general idea, it doesn't necessarily happen, depending on what time of the what part of the world you're in. If you're in a more northern area, then it might come a little sooner.
Right.
So, but that's a general idea.
Okay, great. So I think it is interesting to consider that that I think to some degree naturally we do recognize that our desire for certain kinds of foods and you know that just kind of naturally. So if I'm understanding you correctly, this idea of matching movement, meditation, that kind of thing to a season is actually part of this practice, and it's a bit more disciplined, it sounds like.
Well, a little more, yes, focused, but it's but there's lots of room for flexibility depending on what the individual's schedule is or needs or that kind of thing.
Okay, so you know, I'm guessing that because there are these phases that associate themselves with you know seasons of our calendar year, that it kind of if somebody wants to start, it doesn't really matter when they start. They can start in any of the phases. Does it
True.
matter? Yeah,
it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter because your body is is trying to adjust to the season, you know, as it's happening right now. You don't have to wait for a particular season.
Okay, that's great. Well, that's good because if you want to start, someplace that, you know, obviously that's convenient for people. Right?
Sure.
Yeah. So talk to us. So give me an example of a phase. You know, can you describe winter for me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Winter is the winter phase has to do with winter. I'm sorry, what has to do with water.
Okay.
And in the diagram in the handout, you'll notice there are 5 symbols, and they're connected with a continuous arrow or a line that has arrows. And water's at the bottom, just doesn't really mean anything, it's just the way it is, the placement in the diagram. But the water phase has to do with winter and the kidneys.
Okay.
The kidneys process water.
Right.
And this is what we sometimes refer to as the time of ultimate yin. This is a time of rest and a time of germination and preparation for the coming season. An example it's is easy to see is, I think of the fruit tree, like an apple tree.
Right.
This time of year it's dormant, it's resting.
Right.
And you may have noticed that during winter you want to sleep more, you want to snuggle up in a blanket and read a good book, that kind of thing. So even if we're not consciously aware of it, our body is.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting just to even start to pay attention to that and honor the kind of the natural cycles that our bodies go through. So, okay, that's great. So winter, and then then I'm guessing spring follows that?
Yes, in the diagram, though, there's the arrow. If you follow the arrow, it goes toward the center, and that is Earth.
Oh, okay.
And Earth, this is a time of transition.
Okay.
And it's about 9 days before the change of season, that midpoint between solstice and equinox, and 9 days afterwards. And this is the organ that's affected here is the spleen. And you may notice that the weather is kind of unsettled. That we don't suddenly go from autumn weather, and the next thing you know, it's a blizzard. Hopefully, it's a blizzard and cold temperatures.
Right.
It goes back and forth. Some days we also go back and forth. Some days we feel like shorts and t-shirt, and some days we want to bundle up a little bit more. So it's affecting us as well. Okay. And also our activities. Right.
Okay, so it's like winter, and then there's this transition phase, right? Okay,
yes.
Great, and then
we go to the spring season, or the wood phase, and this is the time of new growth and new beginnings, and it's a time when the liver is affected, and we sometimes refer to this time as the time of rising yang qi. I mentioned qi a little bit ago, so that's energy. Yang is more active, so rising yang.
Okay.
And we see this in the apple tree.
Mm-hmm.
The leaves and the buds are forming and opening as the qi rises in the branches of the tree.
Okay. So what does that look like in people?
Good question. So you might notice that toward the end of winter that you feel a little bit antsy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you want to go work in the garden or the yard. I try to put that off a little bit because it's only like 2 months. It only happened for 2 months, actually a little bit longer. But and maybe you want to go for a walk. So those are different ways that you might notice it.
Yeah. So it's just kind of this urge to be more active.
Yes.
Naturally.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Cool. And so then I'm guessing once we pass through the spring phase or the spring season, then do we go back to a transition again?
Exactly,
okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. And so again, some of the same things as fluctuation in the weather, fluctuation in the way we dress and the way we eat, and then we go on to, if you look at the diagram, the arrow goes up to the flame or fire. This is the fire phase.
Let me guess, that's summer?
It is, yes, yes. Yes, it is. So it's summer, and this is the time of all-out growth and development for the apple tree, and people in general tend to be more active, more social. They want to get out into nature. Sometimes wear as little clothing as possible. That's that's part of it. It's also a time when we want to maybe have a greater desire to connect with something greater than ourselves, to connect with spirit, however we label that or observe that, and it's a very active time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting when you think about. I mean, you think about it just being associated with temperature, but I'm kind of thinking from what you're saying that it really. That yes, there is a temperature, especially for those of us who actually live in a place that has seasons, defined temperature-related seasons. But this would hold true. These cycles would hold true whether there is that or not, right?
True. Yeah. You don't have to have real noticeable temperature changes. They're still happening.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It might be a little more subtle. What's happening?
Yeah, that's great. So again. So we're in this like full bloom of summer, right? And I kind of always like think about everything is about as big as it's going to get. It's just big, it's just out there. And then we go back to a transition again.
Yes, I'll just mention that during this time, the apple, the fruit on the apple tree is starting to ripen.
Oh yeah.
So that's part of this time also.
Part of the process, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then back to the transition.
Okay, and then.
And then we have autumn.
Okay.
This is the metal phase. It's a time that relates to the lungs, and the seeds in the apple are ripening. They turn from whitish to darker brown, and also during the metal phase, the tree starts to the energy in the tree starts to recede. So you will notice the leaves change color. That's part of this as well, and then eventually drop. They drop. That's part of this as well. And in people, guess what? You might feel like it's time to withdraw a little bit. You're a little less active.
Yeah.
Maybe you're thinking about what you'd like to do differently.
Right.
What you want to change in your life. Are there things that you want to hold on to or to release, like the leaves on the tree? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think it's so fascinating that and that's one of the things that I've always really appreciated about the concepts of Chinese medicine in and of itself is that it's so based on observations in nature. And recognizing that we are part of that process. I mean, we can't pretend we're not. Well, we can pretend, but it's not true.
Can't escape it.
Can't escape it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool. And so one of the things that I noticed as you were going through the phases is that you were mentioning associated organs, which I'm guessing is part of the focus of the practice in those.
It's true.
In those times, right? So. Okay, so there's a whole bunch more organs than the ones that you mentioned.
Yes.
So what's the deal?
So from a Qigong perspective, there are actually, I mentioned 5. There are actually 5 pairs of organs.
Okay.
And so, for example, the lungs, the paired organ would be the large intestine.
Okay.
And they're all important. In Qigong, we have a greater emphasis on the organs that I mentioned because they are involved with transformation, and that's part of our focus is transformation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense when you think about the fact that that the interconnectedness of everything, and that's one of the things that I have always really appreciated about these practices is that if one pair of organs isn't being energetically supported, then there's problems everywhere.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating interaction, the way things interact like that, and yes, the support, the well-functioning organs all around are important.
Yeah, exactly, because they all influence one another.
Yes.
I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yes.
So let me ask you. I mean, I can certainly speak myself to the benefits that I experience from practicing Qigong, but what can people expect? From a practice of Qigong.
Well, first I will mention that this is really a lifelong practice. And some things can be noticed fairly quickly. You might notice, especially depending on age and your physical condition, you might notice a little more flexibility, and you might notice a little greater range of motion.
Right.
Now, I say flexibility. You don't need to be scared. We're not going to be putting our palms on the ground with straight legs and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there are some movements and that will contribute to just being a little more flexible.
Okay.
So those things, more long term, you might notice being able to handle stress a little better, being a little calmer. You might have just an increased sense of well-being, and generally healthier.
Right.
And as you continue, there are other things, other benefits that are more subtle. Some of them you may become aware of as you practice. Some of them you may not be, but you don't have to in order for things to happen.
Right. Yeah. And I kind of notice. I always think it's interesting that people always talk about flexibility, and when we think about that term, we always think about the flexibility of our bodies. But having mental and emotional flexibility is also important, and I think that that's part of what you spoke to about kind of the ability to manage stress better is really kind of
that's a good point.
Kind of like the mind part of being more flexible in some ways.
Yes,
that's kind of what I've noticed, and that's what I think is so fascinating is that there is this is a physical practice. I mean, it's a body oriented practice, but there is this whole understanding that all of those things influence our mental processes, how we process emotions, it's you can't separate any of that out.
No.
I mean, I know I said that before, but it's you just can't. And so being able to work with our body-mind system in a more complete way, would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And paying attention to all those systems, not just our favorites.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, which we really love to do, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So one of the other things that I've heard you say before, and that I've had experience of myself, is not only kind of the flexibility that we gain from the practice, but also the flexibility of the practice itself.
Yes.
In terms of, you can kind of make this work for yourself, regardless of how much or how little time you really kind of have. Can you say more about that?
I think it's a wonderful aspect of this, of Qigong. If there are times when you only have a few minutes, there's something you can do.
Right.
Whether it's focusing on your breathing for a few minutes or a simple movement. And many of the exercises that we learn throughout the course of the year are very simple. There really aren't any long series of exercises. With some systems there's not any real long ones here. So if you just have a little bit of time, you can do something simple. As you have more time, you can do additional exercises or do the more repetitions. And so it is very flexible. I often will do something during my 15-minute break.
Yeah.
I have 5 minutes to walk to and from and 10 minutes to engage. I'm done until I can do it again.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Well, I really kind of like the whole, like I mentioned earlier, the whole idea of how, first of all, how flexible the training is and how really kind of spot on it is in terms of, working with what is, in kind of optimizing where we are at whatever particular time we happen to be in. So not only the season that we find ourselves in, but also where we are in that season, ourselves. Yeah, that's great. So I think this is great, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with this. And if you are interested in working with Kirk with the Shigong for the seasons and for seasonal health, you can go to our website to register. It is www.layinggroundwork.com. Thank you.
Thank you.